Hey everybody, want to welcome you to this episode of Youth Group at Home, and I'm excited to get together with you virtually. And though we may be separated, we can still be together, and so I hope you can feel a bit of that. I want to acknowledge a little bit of something. We can easily spend a lot of time just talking about how we need to kind of remember that God does not forsake us, that God hasn't left us, and those are important reminders that we need to regularly talk about and think about and refer to. But it can be a little meaningless when we don't take the time to actually acknowledge some of our grief and some of our difficulties. So I kind of want to explore that a little bit with you today. And so I kind of want to start by reading this passage from, well, not just a passage, but there's a huge chunk of stuff going on here in the book of Ecclesiastes. Yep, I've highlighted some of it, just a little bit. And it's not a book that we tend to go to much, especially in youth ministry. It's not a book that tends to get preached out of a lot because it's a little bit of a downer. It's written by King Solomon, who is incredibly wise. God granted him great wisdom, and in his wisdom, this is what he determined. And he is the teacher, keep that in mind. Everything is meaningless, says the teacher, completely meaningless. What do people get for all of their hard work under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth never changes. The sun rises and the sun sets and then hurries around to rise again. The wind blows south, and then turns north. Around and around it goes, blowing in circles. Rivers run into the sea, but the sea is never full, and then the waters return again to the rivers and flow out again to the sea. Everything is wearisome, beyond description. No matter how much we see, we are never satisfied. No matter how much we hear, we are not content. And history merely repeats itself. It has all been done before. Nothing under the sun is truly new. Some people say, here is something new, but actually it's old. Nothing is ever truly new. We don't remember what happened to the past, and in future generations, no one will remember what we are doing now. I, the teacher, was king of Israel, and I lived in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to search for understanding and to explore by wisdom everything being done under heaven. And I soon discovered that God has dealt a tragic existence to the human race. That's not encouraging. One of the reasons we don't tend to preach from it is because it doesn't help us to walk away feeling good about our lives. I observed everything going on under the sun, and really it is all meaningless, like chasing after the wind. And he kind of goes on. He just talks about some different things. He says, the greater my wisdom, the greater my grief. To increase knowledge only increases sorrow. Well, I know some of you guys feel that way about school, but anyway, that's a whole nother story. He goes into talking about the futility of pleasure even. So like if he's not going to seek wisdom, then might as well seek after things that just feel good. So he says, I said to myself, come on, let's try pleasure. Let's look for the good things in life. But I found that this too was meaningless. So I said, laughter is silly. What good does it do to seek pleasure? And after much thought, I decided to cheer myself with wine. And while still seeking wisdom, I clutched at foolishness. In this way, I tried to experience the only happiness most people find during their brief life in this world. And skipping a bit, he goes on to say, but as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless. Like, yes, chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile anywhere. And he goes in to talk about the wise and the foolish. So I decided to compare wisdom and foolishness and madness. For who can do this better than I, the king? I thought wisdom is better than foolishness, just as light is better than darkness. For the wise can see where they are going, but fools walk in the dark. Yet I saw that the wise and the foolish share the same fate. Both will die. So I said to myself, since I will end up the same as the fool, what's the value of all of my wisdom? This is all so meaningless. For the wise and the foolish both die. The wise will not be remembered any longer than the fool, and in the days to come both will be forgotten. So I came to hate life because everything done here under the sun is so troubling. Everything is meaningless, like Yes, you guessed it, chasing the wind. The futility of work, he talks about. I came to hate all my hard work here on earth, for I must leave to others everything I have earned. And who can tell whether my successes will be wise or foolish? Yet they will control everything I've gained by my skill and hard work under the sun. How meaningless. So I gave up in despair, questioning the value of all of my hard work in this world. Skipping a bit. So I decided there is nothing better than to enjoy food and drink and to find satisfaction in work. And then I realized that these pleasures are from the hand of God, for who can eat or enjoy anything apart from him? God gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy to those who please him. But if a sinner becomes wealthy, God takes the wealth away and gives it to those who please him. This, too, is meaningless, like, you guessed it, chasing the wind.
6.5 hours later.
And the reality is a lot of our life right now kind of feels like that. It just kind of feels meaningless because all the things that we really wanted to do, all the normalcy in our life is just gone. It's canceled. It's been put on hold. It's postponed. A whole lot of different ways to say you can't do it. And so all of the planning that was put into things, all of the looking forward to things, all of the inviting people to things, it's all just feels like it's gone. The reality is our routines give us a lot of comfort. Our routines and our patterns and our regular things in our life give us comfort, give us satisfaction, they give us security. And we don't tend to think about the security that we have from those things until they're just gone. And when they're gone, we're lost. We're just lost. And where we turn and where we look, everything else just seems so meaningless and so less than because we don't have what we are used to. And the reality is we can talk all we want about the goodness of God, which he is good. I'm not saying he's not. But talking about it and talking about his faithfulness and talking about how he has never forsaken us and he never will. And those are all beautiful, vital, critical truths that we have to remember and have to reflect upon. But until we take time to just stop and grieve over the things that we've lost, we're not going to move forward and we're not going to enjoy the newness of what is ahead of us. And so today is really about, tonight, our conversation is really just about kind of taking some time to grieve. Taking some time to kind of name our losses. Taking some time to dig into the reality of what we've had to let go of. None of it by choice. And even at first, the loss of school seems exciting, and some of you are still excited about that. But the reality is you're looking at what that means. Some of you have lost track seasons, baseball seasons, other kinds of sports. Some of you, maybe seniors who are looking at graduating, have lost the last bit of your time together with those friends. There's losses all around us. Some of you are in the midst of dealing with the concern over what's going on with maybe parents and the loss that they're experiencing. Maybe there's been pay cuts at your parents' employment, or maybe a parent has been laid off. Maybe you had a job and you've actually been laid off, or maybe there's fear of it for you or for family members or people you love and care about. Let alone all of the concern and scare and uncertainty with the virus that's going around. Just set all that health stuff aside. There's plenty of other things to mourn and to be concerned about and to cause us worry and to help us to see that everything is meaningless. But the reality is that he goes on to talk about in chapter 3 that there's a time for everything. For everything there's a season, a time for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to turn away, A time to search and a time to quit searching. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. Sorry, a time to tear and a time to mend. Kind of spelled the same. A time to be quiet and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. And this doesn't necessarily mean that he goes on into a more positive direction, because he still laments the injustices of life and the futility of political power, the futility of wealth, and the determined and the unknown of the future, the limits of human wisdom, wicked and righteous, and death comes to all. And there's a few positive things that are thrown in there, the advantages of companionship and approaching God with care and all that kind of stuff. But even in the very end, it kind of ends with this. That's the whole story. The very end of chapter 12. That's the whole story. Here now is my final conclusion. Fear God and obey his commands, for this is everyone's duty. God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, whether good or bad. The reality is there's a time to be born, a time to die. There's a time for everything. And the reality is there's a time to mourn. And unless we take the time to mourn, what do we got? How do we move forward? We got to name our losses. We need time to grieve. We need to take that time and space to acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of things that we're missing in our life now. There's a reality that that though we are spending more time on our devices in order to stay connected to people, we discovered in fullness that our devices do not fulfill like being face-to-face with people are. And so one of my hopes and prayers is that when we come through the end of this, we realize that when we are with people, we need to set our devices aside more to really enjoy and take advantage of those moments. But that's another conversation for another day. I remember when Shane quit playing baseball. He graduated. He was planning on coming to NNU and playing baseball at NNU. But as his senior year, his senior baseball season started up and moved forward, he began to kind of change his mind. And the change kind of happened over a period of time, and he eventually let it go. And this was a big deal for not just him, but for the whole family, because from the time he was like 2, he was hitting my pitches that I was lobbing to him. When he started t-ball, he was really frustrated because that wasn't the way the Mariners do it, hitting it off of a tee. And I had to help tell him, but they do that when they practice, but it didn't matter to a little kid. And when he had to stop at first base because you could only get one base off of a hit in t-ball, he was like, that's not the way the Mariners do it. Constantly, that's not the way the Mariners do it. That's not the way the Mariners do it. And our whole life centered around baseball with Shane. I mean, not our whole life, but I mean, like, we became so accustomed to baseball. The girls grew up not knowing anything but baseball during those seasons. And so when he stopped, there was loss. And it was really hard. I was really surprised. I never realized that we grieve things like that the way that we really do. And we were mourning, we were grieving, and we had to name it. We had to talk about it in order to really get through it. It was harder than I expected. And I'm not saying it wasn't hard for him, but sometimes it felt like it might have been harder for us than it was for him, because it just was really tough. But naming it, giving voice to it, made a big difference. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to name your sorrows. I want you to name your losses. I want you to name the things that have been taken away from you. Make a list, but don't just stop at a list, because there's something powerful about speaking it. Make a list and find somebody, parents or a group of friends or whatever, that you can speak that loss to. Name your losses. Some of you are going to have a big old list. Some of you, it may just be a handful of things, but we need to name them. Write them down and give them voice. Voice it out. An idea is maybe even talk to your parents about putting a list up on the wall where the whole family can write out their losses, and then maybe find a time together to talk about them together. or separate lists that you come together. Consider journaling. Journal about what this COVID-19 virus is doing to you and to your world. And it can be a written journal, it can be a video journal, but at some point you've got to give voice to these losses. So find a way to give voice to these losses. That's the first thing. The second thing I want you to do, I want you to take some time to list out and give voice to things you're thankful for. Kind of a gratitude list. There's a list of loss and there's a list of gratitude. Do the loss first. You can always come back to it and add to it and give voice to, but do the loss first and then move into the gratitude. Excuse me, sorry. Then move into the gratitude lists. And you can come back to both of those, but just start it that way. Process amongst siblings, process amongst friends, process amongst parents and family, but create those lists and allow God to work in your mourning and your grieving at the things that you've lost. I hope you've continued with the challenge from last week about spending at least 3 days in the Word, whether it's on your own or whether it's utilizing our daily episodes of The Loaf, which you can find on Instagram. But one way or another, I hope you've been doing that. I want to encourage you to continue on with that challenge, but I want to add this little piece in to help you process so you can kind of see the other side of grief. And it's going to take some time. Just making a list doesn't mean you're instantly going to feel better, but making the lists are going to help you move forward in that process. So take the time, and don't forget, in the description of this episode below is a list of some questions, including some prompts for lists, but there's some other questions for you to kind of think through whatever your situation may allow. But I want you to know we love you, we miss you, and we long to be back together face to face where we can do this journey together again. Until then, we are so grateful for technology that allows us to connect, at least in this way. And so as you move forward into your week ahead, know that we love you, we miss you, and we are praying for you. God bless. Let's go. Running's for losers. I am not in shape. I really need to get out and move more.